We're now going to create another macro from scratch here, and we'll just add another module sheet just to remind you how to do so. This next macro is going to combine data from multiple workbooks together into a single list. That can be another repetitive task that we have, where we might have a bunch of workbooks and we want to take data from a certain worksheet and stack all that data together. So to begin, what we'll do is we will create a blank workbook. And so in this case, we're not going to put this in the personal macro workbook. This is actually going to be a brand new tool that will be a standalone tool that's where we're creating a brand new workbook. So create that blank workbook and we'll go ahead and save it and make note of the name of that workbook. Step 2, if the developer menu is on screen, we'll choose developer. Step 3, we'll click Visual Basic. If we have not displayed the developer menu, we can press Alt F11. Now within our workbook, notice whether you've saved it or not, whatever the name of it currently is, if it's created a new workbook and it's book 1, within the Visual Basic Editor, this is step 4, this is why we need to make note of the workbook that we created. So if we've not saved it yet, then it'll have a generic name like book 1. If we have saved it, we can use that name. But we right click on that particular VBA project. Then we choose Insert. We choose Module. That will add a module sheet to that workbook. Now we are going to set a property here. We're going to make a little different use of that properties window. And what we're going to do for step 7 is we're going to click on the first sheet in our workbook. So you may have to expand the Microsoft Excel objects folder for that given VBA project. Click once on that sheet, and in the properties name, assign what's called a code name. So in this case, we're going to refer to that sheet as data. What you may not realize is that every Excel worksheet has two different names. There is the visible name that the user sees on the worksheet tab that they can change. And if they do change that, that can break our macros. There is also a hidden behind the scenes name that's known as a code name. And if you refer to that sheet by its code name, it then doesn't matter what the user does with the visible sheet tab name. They can change it as many times as they want and it will not affect your code. So that's why I like to integrate code names for worksheets so that I eliminate a potential failure point from my macro so that if the user changes the sheet name, that won't break my macro. Keep in mind that when we have formulas, if we change the sheet tab name, Excel goes and updates all the formulas. But in our programming code, the programming code is static. It does not reflect any changes to the worksheet. It's not tied to the worksheets. So if someone changes the worksheet name, it's upon us to go back into our code and change that name. That's why I like to assign a code name to any sheets that I'll be referencing in my workbook. So this data tab is where I'm going to stack all the data from these other workbooks, and then I'll start a new macro. I'll call it combine workbooks. And so we'll put sub combine workbooks and press enter. That will add the parentheses and then also add the words in sub to end that macro. So in Excel, I want a brand new workbook. I can either press Control N, or I can go to the File menu, go to the New command. If I'm using Office 365, I can just double-click Blank Workbook, or I can go to New in all versions of Excel, double-click Blank Workbook. So here's my brand new workbook. From there, I want to get to the Visual Basic Editor. So if I have the developer menu shown, I can click Visual Basic or press Alt F11. Now, the workbook that I'm in, if we go back, this is called Book 2. So notice I need to make note of the name. So it's Book 2. Go back to the Visual Basic Editor. And you may need to pull the Properties window down to see all the documents that you have opened. Another thing you can do, you can collapse the VBA projects. So if you get too much going on over on the side here, if you collapse the project, that will make things more manageable. So Book 2 is that new workbook that I created. So I want to insert a module sheet in this workbook. So I will right click. I can right click on any element of it. I can right click on the file name. I can right click on anything that's part of that VBA project. I can choose Insert and then User Form. So there's my blank user form. Now, before I add the programming code, let's go ahead and click on sheet 1 here. And so there is a name that's in parentheses. This is the code name. So I'm going to call that data. Further down the list, there is another name. This other name is what shows up on the worksheet tab. So maybe we call this consolidated. So just to show you, by changing the name here, back in Excel, this tab now says consolidated. If I wanted to change this and say combined data, and then go back to the Visual Basic Editor, the name field now says combined data. So the name field, the second instance of it, is the name that the user gets to assign. The first instance is the name that the programmer gets to assign. The user doesn't see or isn't aware of the programmer name, and so that's why we can safely use it in our programming code. Doesn't matter how often the user changes the combined data name, or the second name won't have any impact on our code as long as we reference that workbook based on the shortcut or the nickname that we've called data. So in the module sheet then we'll say sub combine workbooks. This macro is going to go through the open workbooks and copy a block of data from each workbook and stack it all together. So it's going to be another instance of creating a loop.